This Week in Science and Education is presented in association with the Science Coordinators and Consultants Association of Ontario. Visit their website at sccao.ca.
This Week in Science and Education is brought to you in part by the University of Western Ontario, www.uwo.ca. We thank them for their support. This Week in Science and Education is also brought to you by Laurentian University. Check out Laurentian at laurentian.ca. We thank them for their support.
Hey everybody, it's time for This Week in Science and Education. This is T-WiSE, episode 76, recorded Thursday, April the 12th, 2012. Hey everybody, this is your host Kevin Cougler. Thanks for taking the time to join us on This Week in Science and Education. Another great show today, wonderful guest, a good friend of mine and a real long supporter of the VROC program and Partners in Research. We've got the Germ Guy all the way from Ottawa. We're going to find out who is this Germ Guy very shortly. But first I want to welcome my co-hosts, because I think I forgot to welcome you guys last week. So welcome once again, Colin and Thomas. How are you guys?
Good.
I'm better now that I've been acknowledged. Thanks for that.
We were going to edit it in, but then, we forgot and all that. Yeah, my fault, my bad. Guys, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Jason Tetro, otherwise known as the Germ Guy in circles around Ottawa and Ontario and beyond. Among other things, the Germ Guy has this wonderful blog that tells us all sorts of scary stuff about germs, and I guess we're going to answer one of those age-old questions today of, is it safe for us to lick an ice cream cone after a dog or kiss a dog or something like that? I'm not exactly sure where we're going with this, but that's one of the mysteries that will be demystified. So, Dr. Tetro, thank you for joining us on This Week in Science and Education.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So let's get started by talking a little bit about who you are and what you do. Give us a quick 2-minute spiel on what is Dr. Tetro all about and how does the Germ Guy play in?
Well, essentially, I've been doing research for about 25 years, and most of that's been in microbiology. I've been working with all sorts of different bugs in the past. I apologize if I say bugs. I actually mean microbes. It's just lingo that we use in the lab. So I worked with HIV back in the 90s. I worked with hepatitis in the 2000s, and more recently I've been working with the human norovirus, which most of you probably believe as the cruise ship virus. I just had it most recently. It is a rather horrible illness. I would rather no one had it, which is why I work with it. About 5 years ago, I was asked by a local television station here in Ottawa to do a little highlight on germs. And it was probably one of the most viewed broadcasts that they had in the Ottawa region for that year. They brought me back, and for the next 3 years, I did live work, news at noon, taking questions, answers, meeting people in public. And from that sort of stemmed what the host called the Germ Guy phenomenon. And of course, being a scientist, whenever you hear something that could potentially lead to funding, you go for it. And I basically trademarked the Germ Guy and created the blog, which I'm sure there'll be a link to a bit later. And the rest is pretty much history.
And in fact, I'm not sure if we can talk about this, but can we allude to any type of authoring deals that are coming up in your near future?
Yes, actually, I have the advance now. So I will be writing a book with Random House Doubleday, and it will be entitled The Germy Life, or at least that's what we're hoping to call it. And look for that to be coming out sometime in 2013.
Excellent. Well, we'll put a link up to that when it comes out on our show notes, which you can find at twise.vroc.ca. Let's talk a little bit about hand sanitizers. First question on everybody's mind. I always hear mixed reviews. Hand sanitizers, are they useful? Are they not useful? How do we use them appropriately? Can you demystify hand sanitizers for us?
So this is my hand sanitizer. It's a prop that I carry everywhere I go, and people always ask me, so I have no problem showing it off. Now, hand sanitizer is actually going to work, but it does have to have an alcohol component in it, and it should be between 62 and 80%. I've published a paper on this, and we can show that these hand sanitizers will kill bacteria and also viruses and some fungus. It will not kill C. difficile, which is a major problem in Canada, and it also is not going to kill bacteria spores and parasites. So I think, for the most part, hand sanitizers give us something that we can use to keep us safe when we don't have a sink and soap and water. When I use it, I basically am trying to maintain my own health and hygiene. Some people think I might be a little too religious with it, but I was just swabbing in Montreal the other day, and I was finding fecal coliforms pretty much on surfaces you really don't want to know about. And so I like to say that it's probably better to be prudent than to have an infection, or at least feel bad from being inoculated from a bacteria or virus.
Let's go to the guys for some questions. Thomas, you want to start us off?
Sure. So, Jason, it sounds like you've got a lot of outreach going on. I'm curious how you've managed to keep up your research program and how you tie between doing basic research and the really interesting outreach work that you have been doing.
Well, I have to admit, before I started doing this, I didn't have the bags under the eyes. I will admit that outreach in parallel with research is a very difficult thing. However, we're moving forward in Canada, at least, into a world where knowledge translation, where we are actually taking the information that we gain in the lab and somehow making it relevant to people in the real world. And so for me, I might be an extreme example, but it's also something that a lot of researchers are going to eventually have to learn. Because if their research is basic and there is no true application to it, which is valid in a lot of cases, at least you can talk about it so that you can make it seem like there's going to be an application. Because the public is not going to be interested in something that is very small or a molecule within a particular entity or something along those lines. But if you actually show that, say, a gold nanoparticle can help you look beautiful in makeup, then people are going to understand that. So my time is about 50-50 split, and like I said, I get the bags in the eyes as a result. But I think it's something that researchers are eventually going to have to adopt and start putting a little bit more time into.
That's great. Thank you.
Colin, I'm wondering, hand sanitizers, I'm not really religious with these. I don't carry one around like Dr. Tetro. If I'm in a hospital, I use a sanitizer before I go visit somebody. Right. If I see one on a wall somewhere, I kind of do it. What's your approach?
I'm a bit of a hand washer, I guess. I'm trying to make sure that I wash them many times a day. So it's interesting. You talked about doing swabs, for example, around a city. Like you said, you were in Montreal doing swabs and finding fecal coliforms everywhere, which I got to admit, and you said right off the top you were going to gross us out a little bit. That grossed me out just a little bit. Coming from my background as a secondary science teacher, I teach secondary high school science. And I work with a lot of science teachers. That's the kind of thing that is sort of very often done in biology classes. And I'm just sort of wondering if the connection between that basic research that what you do in the lab, which is obviously more complex than you can do at a high school, but the kind of things that your typical biology classroom could do, and if there's a connection between what the kids can do and what you guys find out in the lab, something that would be a very obvious kind of transition for them. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Going back to the swabbing example, I actually swabbed the hands of one of the striking women in Montreal. And it was quite interesting because she thought she had the cleanest hands in the world, and unfortunately she had some fecal coliforms. But, I mean, it's as simple as being able to purchase some media, agar, petri dishes, and having your hands. And one of the things that I do, and I've actually done this with CBC's The National a couple of years ago, is we actually take hands and we swab them, or we actually do handprints on the petri dish. Yep. Then what you do is you wash your hands, and then you take the other hand, and you put it on the petri dish, and you look at the difference between them. Sure. What we found was that, yes, indeed, when you do use hand sanitizers, you are definitely going to have a difference. And then you wash your hands, you are definitely going to have a difference. As for washing your hands on a regular basis, I like to say that if you follow the Beatles model, i.e. a day in the life, you should be doing it about 8 to 12 times.
Right.
And for the younger folks out there, I really don't have a comparison. Ask your parents. But 8 to 12 times is actually a really good number that you should be aiming for. And having the hand sanitizer, as I said, whenever it looks like you might be touching something that you're not sure about, like a microwave handle which had, tons of bacteria and fecal coliforms, or maybe the handle on a bathroom, and for women especially, I found yeast there, which is a huge issue. Get that hand sanitizer out and keep those hands clean.
Okay, then
So
I'm just thinking.
Go ahead, Colin.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Kev. I'm thinking here again, as a high school teacher, and some of the activities that you described, agar and doing street plates and that sort of thing, are exactly the kind of things that traditionally we've done. Part of me wonders about safety, right? Because we're talking about various kinds of bacteria and growing them in a high school setting. What are the kind of safety protocols and precautions that we really should be taking as high school teachers when we get kids to do these kinds of, literally hands-on activities, but we're maybe not sure of what's actually going to be growing once we've got them in the medium and growing? So just any sort of tips on that kind of stuff?
Yes, we have a rule in the laboratory. Whenever we're working with bacteria, it doesn't matter what type of bacteria. It could be something as simple as an environmental strain all the way up to a pathogenic virus, and that is do not lick. It's absolutely true. I mean, it's something that I've lived by for about 25 years, and it works. So really, if you are going to be doing this type of work and you are going to be growing higher concentrations of viruses, such as colonies on a Petri plate, the best thing to do is just keep the plate closed. Don't open it, and you won't have any problems. If you start looking at, doing subculturing and looking at it under a microscope, then I think you're going to need someone with a little bit more of a background. However, one of my colleague, she's actually a master's student who finished up in one of my projects. She's actually going to be a science teacher, and I've learned that a lot of science teachers have some very good educational background and can handle the work that it takes to maintain that safety for the students. Teachers are fantastic.
Good. Okay, good. Thank you.
I think the only thing that's coming to my mind before we go for a break, and I'll just ask you this real quickly if I could, how do you not go all Howard Hughes-ish, during your day? Because, you know so much about this stuff. Like, every surface you touch, you must think, Joe, I need to analyze this before I open this door. How do you separate those two?
I think there's sort of a desensitization that comes with it. But I'll share with you a little anecdotal story from the lab. Before the new rules, well, it's over 20 years, but when rules came in, prior to that, we had a rule in the lab, and that was when you started in the lab, you would actually work, and within about 3 weeks, you were going to get sick. So you took a couple days off, then you came back to the lab, and now you had immunity to everything you were working with. Well, I kind of look at life that way. If I'm scared and do the Howard Hughes with everything, then there's a likelihood it's eventually going to infect me. But if I'm exposed and I'm inoculated and I, feel a little woozy or have a little diarrhea or something along those lines, then that's just my body coexisting with the environment. So, prudency is one thing, but we still do have to coexist, and it's something I call corporeal ecology, and we can talk more about that if you'd like later.
Sounds good. We're going to take a quick 2-minute break.
It's not that much different than being in a school. Always get sick after the first couple of weeks. It's the same thing.
Or a university, believe me.
Yeah.
Those undergraduates are not. Yeah, we'll move on.
Well, we're going to take a quick 2-minute break, everybody, and when we come back, we're going to find out why Dr. Thomas Merritt is so quiet today. He's uncharacteristically quiet. There's something going on. We're going to find out. And stick with us. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Thanks, everybody.
This Week in Science and Education is brought to you by Sheridan Institute of Technology and Advanced Learning. At Sheridan, students shine brighter. Check out sheridanc.on.ca.
And we're back with Dr. Jason Tetro, the Germ Guy from the University of Ottawa, who's freaking us out about all sorts of things that, could make for a very bad day in some cases. Actually, no, it's a very enlightening conversation. Thomas, are you here today? What's going on? You're so quiet. I'm worried.
So, Jason, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you've taken your your role as a scientist. So, I mean, a lot of the stuff you're talking about is really interesting, but I mean, as Colin was saying, it's things that people have been doing in high school for a while. You're doing neat science, you know, like the rest of us. We're funded scientists. We're at the edge of our pool of knowledge. How are you taking that and bringing that into outreach and that kind of cutting-edge excitement into talking to people about science?
Well, actually, for my own research, it's kind of drips and drops. The actual research I'm doing is developing a platform for diagnostics and treatments for bioterror weapons, including such things as norovirus, anthrax, malaria, and dengue.
Wow.
That's very difficult to translate to the public.
That's very cool.
However, the principles upon which that you use in order to understand is really the basis for the translation. So if I understand that I can do a diagnostic test and I know that I'm going to find it in saliva in people who have been in this environment, I'm going to take the bug out of the equation, and I'm going to talk about the fact that you could be exposed to particular agents of disease in these particular areas. And cruise ships is the perfect analogy for that. The cruise ship industry was essentially slaughtered by the norovirus. And so we did more of an understanding as to how the norovirus was moving through these cruise ships and found that it was airborne. Well, once you have an airborne virus, and it goes right back to SARS as well, you've got a huge problem. And suddenly, this is where you need to start putting out the message that, you know, you have to be hygienic and you have to be able to control the spread. So really, it's the context of the message based on what we've learned rather than the actual research itself. And again, I've done work with C. difficile in the laboratory, but it's very difficult for me to start talking about C. difficile as through a knowledge translation because it has been such an egregious agent of disease in Canada and it has cost so many people their lives.
Okay, great, thank you.
So we've been talking. I mean, it's very interesting listening to you talk, Jason, about sort of the connection between outreach and a public understanding of science, combined with your laboratory research, which you just sort of briefly touched on, but is obviously way more in depth. And it's very interesting seeing that connection between that public understanding and the cutting edge of science. And I really like that last question that Thomas asked and what you talked about. And it made me think about what would be your advice then for say a high school teacher or an elementary school teacher, because that's really what we try and do in a lot of ways with high school or with students in general, is get sort of a general good understanding of the nature of science as well as the basic content, but then also understand where it could potentially lead. So what would you sort of say to teachers and students about getting that foundation, but then kind of leaving that door open that it gets really cool and really in depth the further down the road you go?
I think it's you sort of flip the coin. In terms of my research and how I do the public or send it out to the public, I do it in drips and drops because essentially I have to be able to contextualize and then share. Right. I think it's the exact opposite. For high schools and other education institutions, you really want to focus on the fun and the public perspective and the application of what's going on. And then when you start to see interest, or you start to see that gleam of light in someone's eyes, you get to drip and drop a little bit of the technique or a little bit of the materials and methods or a little bit of the information. Let's put it this way. We could go into a high school and a teacher could talk about the fact that, you could definitely share an ice cream with your dog and you're not going to get sick from it. However, if you don't share the ice cream with your dog, the dog could bite you, at which point you could get capnocytophagia, which is an anaerobic bacteria that could kill you. So at the end of the day, it's actually safer to share your ice cream with your dog than to hold it from. And what I've now done is I've now introduced the term of capnocytophagia, which they can now understand. They can look for it on Wikipedia. They can find out what the bug is, and they can go further in depth using any of the resources that you have in library. And so that's what I mean by drips and drops. And people like me, these knowledge brokers, can help you through VROC to be able to put those drips and drops.
Okay. Hey, can you guys hear me again?
Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, you're back.
Yes. Here's your answer,
Sorry, I'm back. Hey, can you guys see that presentation on screen? I wanted to show something here.
We lost Colin, but we got that.
The YouTube video? Yeah,
Okay.
I can see it.
Oh, perfect. Good. So I just want to briefly show this. This is really cool. I don't know if the sound's going to come through, but Jason, talk us through this Super Bowl project.
Well, I guess before Christmas, I was sitting down with a colleague of mine, and we were kind of joking about the use of hand sanitizers in a restaurant. And he came up with the idea of, well, what would life be like without hand sanitizers? And so we decided, let's think about this. And then after a few beverages of a non-adult brand, we actually came up with a very interesting concept. And so we filmed that in January. And thanks to the help of some people at a hand sanitizer company, we were able to do a launch during the Super Bowl. And so when you see these 3 ads, and they are on my website, you'll actually get an understanding as to how we can use comedy for public service announcements, which I'm really loving, and I'm actually hopefully going to be doing more of these for the Olympics.
Cool.
That's great. That's just a lot of fun, eh? You know what I'm taking from this is that you got a job, you're a scientist, you got to do important things, all that kind of stuff. But you actually love it because you do the fun little projects like this, and then you share it with the community, with the world. I just think that's fantastic.
Well, at the end of the day, I was just going to say, at the end of the day, what we do in the research laboratory, we wouldn't be doing it if we didn't love it. And I think we should be sharing that love with the public more often. And I'm actually a child of the 70s. Again, kids, ask your parents. But I honestly believe that if we don't share that love with the public, and there are ways we can do it, then really we are going to be the classic definition of what a scientist was. And in this case, don't ask your parents, ask your grandparents.
So in the theme of today's show then, talking about dogs, first guy to scratch his head gets to ask the last question. Go. Okay, neither one but bit at that one, no pun intended.
We already covered that, Kevin, and it's Thomas.
Oh, you did?
Thomas. Thanks for interrupting.
Yeah, nicely done. Jason, we often are talking about how to get kids excited about science. And through the course of today's show, we've gone 180 degrees, and what we got is a lot of excitement. Do you have any word of wisdom? How do we get scientists more excited about talking about science in the way that you've been doing it? How do we're talking to high school educators about how they get kids excited about science, but our better trained scientists are better able to go back into the classrooms and say, this is what I'm doing, this is why it's important, this is where your tax dollars are going. So what do we do as a scientific community or as an educational community to try to promote that? How do we get more people that are doing more outreach?
Great question.
I think what it comes down to is a lot of people really separate their science lives from the lives that they have either at home or with their friends. And I think what we really need to do is to be able to help researchers realize that these are not independent of one another, and that you can actually link them together. Okay, I have a project that's coming up based on an absolute love of myself and a couple of others, in which we're developing a Sherlock Germs character based on the Sherlock Holmes character, and essentially he's basically going around and looking for germs, but doing so in such a way that it follows a canon that people who love that kind of genre will actually follow and buy. I think researchers have a lot of loves. I mean, it could be the Big Bang Theory, it could be books, it could be, a number of different things. If you can find a way to take the research that you love and start putting that into these popularized genres, then I think you have the ability to be able to talk to people. And quite honestly, and I know this, you get a scientist showing the excitement that they have for what they do in the lab, people will get excited. It doesn't matter. I've seen people talk about the most boring point mutation in a stem cell, and people go crazy about it because that person had the excitement and really popularized it. So
yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, at the end of the
Speaking
day,
of his...
it's really what it comes down to is making it fun showing how much fun you're having to everybody else.
That's great. Thank you.
Well, and I think I speak on behalf of these guys where I say that this has been a heck of a lot of fun with you today, Dr. Tetro. Your enthusiasm definitely comes across, And we're lucky to have guys like you in the front line fighting some of these diseases as in your capacity as a microbiologist. Thanks for coming on the show today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
No problem.
Well, that'll wrap it up, everybody, for another episode of This Week of Science and Education. I want to thank my co-hosts, as usual, Dr. Thomas Merritt from Laurentian University and Colin Jagoe from the Kawartha Pine Ridge District School Board. Tune in again next week. We'll talk some more about science, research, what's it all mean, what are we going to do with it in education. We'll find out next week. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Take care.